The version of the one-time pad that actually gives it its name were the paper pads that were distributed first by the Germans and then by the British. So the German version came first. It was invented by Werner Kunze of the German Pers ZS, ZS, which is their signal intelligence agency, about 1922. This was a decimal system. Remind you that the original Miller method was also a decimal system. So people who say to you, "Whoa, the one-time pad is exclusive war of bits." No, it wasn't. Just a particular implementation of it. And then these pads got invented independently by the British around 1926, and it's from the British version that we now get the name one-time pad. As I mentioned in the beginning, there is a practical problem. The difficulty with the one-time pad is you need just as much key material as the combined total length, all the messages that you are going to send and receive, and more, because you need to have some in reserve for future messages, and you have to have some for sending a message again if it gets garbled or there's some kind of a transmission error. So eventually, no matter how many tapes you make, you will run out. And of course, if you find out that an enemy has obtained some of your tapes, then you have to have all new tapes, or all new pads where with more keyed material. So that's where the big problem is. So if you want to send, if you can of course send these new key streams via wire. You don't want to send them in clear, because then your enemy, who may be wiretapping your communications, will now have your key just as well as the intended recipient. So you need to encipher them, and the best method of encipherment would be to encipher them with a one-time pad. So to encipher your key, you need a second key. That has to be just as long as the first key. So you need double the material. But how do you get this second key to your recipient? Well, you need a key to transmit the transmission key, and potentially ad infinitum. There's the practical problem of the one-time pad, and that's what has limited its use for all these years. And one solution to this problem is to use a random number generator, and they fall into two big categories. The first are the true random numbers. These generally are numbers that come from nature in some manner. You can get it from cosmic rays, from nuclear decay, thermal noise. You can watch the raindrops and falling on a window and then sliding down a slant. You can take photos out in nature. You can shoot upward, you point the camera, shoot upward through the branches of a tree in winter. You can look downward and look at the grass or the pebbles on the beach. You can watch flocks of birds. A good one is crashing waves, because that sends out a pattern of spray in all directions. You can also make your own. There's human-made random numbers that can be. You can set up a camera on a bridge and record all the cars, not only their colors, but their positions next to one another, their license plates, the how close or far apart they're positioned. You can watch rushing people. If you go up into Grand Central Station, you can stand where the Oyster Bar used to be, and you can see down into the Grand Gallery, and at the rush hour, you can see hundreds of people, possibly thousands of people, rushing about on that immense main concourse. You can take a paintbrush and spatter it onto a white wall, and you just run your finger across the bristles, and little flecks of paint go this way and that. Then you can do it with several colors, and they can overlap and they can merge. And you can also collect keystrokes, not just what the keys are, but the exact timing of it. And this would not, you're not talking about here keystrokes of you sitting at your terminal, but rather keystrokes coming in to a server, for example, that may be collecting keystrokes and servicing hundreds or thousands of people all at the same time. But even for all that, all of these methods are too slow for the computer communications. Even if you store them up for a while and against future need. And the other thing is, it's all overkill. You don't really need true random numbers. You will hear people say adamantly and very confidently, oh, for cryptography, you need true random numbers. You don't. You just need numbers that are random enough so that an opponent cannot break them, cannot determine the sources or the key or the seeds of the number generators. So you have the other side of the coin is the pseudo-random number generators. And I'm just going to mention a bunch of them, 8 of them to be exact, without getting much into them. So the most popular kind is the multiplicative congruential generator. If the stream of numbers you're generating is x sub I, then x sub n is generated by taking some constant a, multiplying it by the preceding number, and taking that modulo p, where in this case p must be a prime. A little less popular, but similar and just about as fast, is the linear congruential generator. So here it's just like the previous one, a times x sub n minus 1, but there's a second constant b, which you add, and you take that not modulo a prime this time, but modulo a number which is preferably a power of a small prime. And the most popular, of course, is something like 2 to the 32nd or 2 to the 64th, some number like that. But you can do it 5 to the 6th or 3 to the 10th or whatever number you like. One of the earliest pseudorandom number generators was the Greenberg generator, and this was chained addition. So xn is equal to the sum of xn minus 1 and xn minus s, where s is the size of the generator, and that's all modulo some arbitrary number, but in practice it's almost always a power of 2. There's the darling of the electrical engineers. That's the chained exclusive OR. It's the same thing again, but instead of adding, you now do an exclusive OR operation. So you combine the preceding number with the number s positions back through an exclusive OR. And this can be, I have it here with just 2 terms, but you can have 4 terms or 6 terms. You can do an odd number of terms, but the periods of generators with an odd number of terms, it generally is smaller, so you don't get as much bang for the buck if you use an odd number of terms here. As I say, electrical engineers love this because you can do this as a circuit, and you can build this right into your machine and get random numbers that way. The most random among these is the XOR shift, exclusive OR shift, invented by George Masalia of Florida State University. Each successive number is generated from the preceding number by shifting, exclusive ORing it with the shifted number, then shifting that and exclusive ORing that number with with the previous number, so you have to generate each number in the series, you have to do 2 shift and exclusive OR operations. There's another one called FRAND. You may notice it looks a little bit like Frank. That's not accidental. That's my invention. It's a chained exclusive OR, except that every a certain number of steps, you do a cyclic shift of the number. So there are certain combinations that give you extremely, incredibly long periods. One of them happens to be using 29-bit integers and 40 integers in the seed, and then you get a period of something like 2 to the 1360th power. It's a very long power, and just as fast as the others. Linear feedback shift register is basically the chained exclusive OR. The difference is that this is done electrically and usually on a single bit, whereas the other is done a word at a time. And finally, there's the Mersenne twister, which is an invention, I think from the 1970s by a couple of Japanese inventors. And it has an incredibly long period, but like 2 to the 20,000th. That's the period of this. But it has a lot of downsides. It can go into very, very long sequences of all zeros, or all something like 100 zeros and a 1 and another 100 zeros and a 1 1 and another 100 zeros and 1 0. That sort of thing. So there's problems with it, and you typically, when you use this, you have to run it like 50,000 cycles before you start using the numbers. But I'm just going to pick one, and as I said, the multiplicative congruential generator is the most popular. It's so easy to do. It's like, one statement in a programming language. The numbers that in the series are x sub n. There's a multiplier a, which is a constant, and a prime modulus. Now you have to pick this a carefully. A has to be a primitive root of p. So that means that a squared, a cubed, and so forth, through a to the p minus 1 modulo p are all distinct. That is, these numbers, the powers of a modulo p, are a permutation of the numbers from 1 through p minus 1. And there's a warning here, because half the people who use the multiplicative congruential generator use it incorrectly. When you use it, the number that you use as your random byte, if you're generating using this to generate a random byte, should be the floor of 256 x sub n divided by p. So in other words, you're taking this, you're viewing xn as if there were a binary point, a decimal point in the front of the leftmost position, and then you're multiplying that to get a proportion of 256 numbers that are expressible in 1 byte. So what most people do, or about half the people do, is they take x sub n modulo 256 instead, and that's the wrong way to do it. This is biased. The random part of xn is the high order part of it, of the number. So this gets you the high order part. This expression, x sub n modulo 256, gets you the low order part of the number, and it has a short period, and it can be biased. Biased means it doesn't give every number with equal probability, but in this case, lower outputs are more frequent than higher outputs. In other words, output of 1 will occur much more frequently or notably more frequently than an output of 255. So now the concept that that we want to display here is that we're going to take some multiplicative congruential generators that we could do this with any kind of generator at all, but I'm just using this one because, as I say, it's the most common. In this case, we're going to try to take 5 multiplicative congruential generators. We call them S, G0, G1, G2, and G3. The one we designated as S is called the selector, and it generates just a 2-bit pseudo-random number, and then we use that to choose one of these other 4 generators for them to produce the next random byte. That sounds like a pretty good way. You just switch back and forth between the generators in a kind of a pseudo-random pattern. That should give you a very random sequence. Right? Wrong. So let's assume that the prime we've chosen is 2 to the 31st minus 1. That's an extremely popular choice because it's the biggest number you can get in a 32-bit register, the biggest prime you can get in a 32-bit register, assuming, of course, that the high order bit is the signed bit. And with 5 of these generators, you have an effective key size of 5 times 31, which is 155 bits. Today's standard is 128-bit keys. 155 bits sounds really good, and it's not. More than one book has proposed this method, so that does not work. And I'm going to tell you why, by way of a warning. At least one of those 4 the G generators will have 5 outputs among the next 17 bytes. Why is that true? Because 4 times 4 is 16, and if you have 17, at least one of those, you have 4 numbers that add up to 17. At least one of them has to be bigger than 4. Every time I tell people about this, they always get that question. So that's why. We don't know which of these 4 generators it is, but of course we don't care. We're going to just try to find crack one of those 5 generators, and that's gets our foot in the door. So 5 out of 17 is only 6,188, which is less than 2 to the 13th. And you can just try them all. Only a very small fraction of the seeds will make all 5 of the corresponding plain text characters to be letters. So we're gonna make an assumption that here, just for that would be true typically in military situations, that the message you're sending consists entirely of uppercase letters with no spaces or punctuation or digits or anything like that. That has been the rule in military communications for many, many years. We found just a handful of these 6,188, let's say, well, 26 out of 256 means 1 out of 10 will be a letter. So 5 coming out as letters means 1 out of 10 to the 5th roughly will be a letter, which is 1 out of 100,000. The odds are that there will be at most 1. If you expand it, and then you're looking at say Unicode, non-military application, and it's characters in Unicode. So you have the uppercase letters, the lowercase letters, the digits, the punctuation. You add them all up. There's maybe a third of the 256 characters will be meaningful. So we would have the 6,188 divided by 3 to the 5th. 3 to the 5th isn't that big, but it cuts down the possibilities by a lot. It's 3 to the 5th is 243. This divided by 243 is, I don't know, less than 30. So in any event, we have, let's say, let's say a bad case, we have 30 plausible outputs for seeds rather for that generator. All right, 30 isn't too many to work with. So let's, and we've identified the positions among the 17 outputs from the generator, which produce those characters. So now we have not 17 characters to work with. We have only 12 characters. So the number of possibilities is 5 out of 12 is much smaller, and we continue that way. This is crackable. This is not a safe way to go. Let's see if we can find a safe way to combine several multiplicative congruential generators. Again, let's choose the prime p is 2 to the 31st minus 1. You know that you probably all know that one. It's 2,147,000,000 something. So this gives you a 31-bit key. If you use 4 such multiplicative generators, you have an effective key size of 4 times 31 is 124 bits. That's almost 128 we're looking for. It's close enough. You can combine these 4 pseudo-random bytes, in other words, the outputs of each of the 4 pseudo-random generators by exclusive ORing them. But that's linear, and so your opponent could potentially separate these out by using linear algebra. So we need something a little bit stronger than that. The thing that saves you is that you don't have to use the same prime for each generator. You have 4 generators. You can use 4 different primes. Typically, you would use the 4 largest 31-bit primes that exist, something like 2 to the 31st minus 1, 2 to the 31st minus 13, 2 to the 31st minus 29, whatever. I don't know. I'm making those numbers up, but they'll all be close to 2 to the 31st, so you're not losing much by making them all different. So let's try something a little more sophisticated than this just exclusive ORing the bytes. We can let's again use 5 multiplicative congruential generators. Same thing we did before: a selector and 4 number generators. This time, though, we'll take the high order 16 bits of the selector to form 4 4-bit coefficients. Okay, C1, C2, C3, and C0, C1, C2, and C3, with the stipulation that at least one of them must be odd. And the reason is, if they're all even, then your sum is going to be even, and you have leaked 1 bit of information to your opponent. And that's actually a good thing, because it means that about once every 16 cycles or so, you'll skip a cycle, and that gives you an irregular, like a kind of a herky-jerky motion of the generators, and that's a very good thing. So we use a linear combination C0 x0 plus C1 x1 plus C2 x2 plus C3 x3 modulo 256 as the random output byte. It has the disadvantage that it requires 5 pseudo-random numbers to produce each byte, and in fact it requires just slightly more than that because of because you reject the outputs of S that are all 0. Still very fast. 5 linear multiplicative congruential. I'm tripping over my tongue here. 5 multiplicative congruential generators are still reasonably fast. It's only 5 multiplications, 5 modular divisions, and there are fast ways to do it when you choose the prime 2 to the 31st minus 1. So we have one well, called one leg of the stool. This we're going to make a system that will not only use the pseudo-random numbers, but that will be resistant to attack in other ways. So far, everything we've been doing is all linear. The generator is linear. It's a multiplication and a modular division. We've been combining them by linear combinations, and linear functions are easy to solve. Everybody knows what matrices are. That's the magic that solves linear combinations. So we're going to introduce 3 simple substitutions into this mix. We'll call them A, B, and C, uppercase A, B, and C. And these are going to be non-linear simple substitutions. And in the book, I talk about this non-linearity for page after page, because there's so much to it. There's the linearity in the individual bits. There's linearity in the entire number. There you can have each of the 2 nibbles of the byte can be linear independently of one another. You can divide the byte into say 323 bits, and those can individually be linear, and it also can be linear within a generalized mathematical ring. So we're going to try to get as much non-linearity as we possibly can at this point, to make it to give our opponent as much grief as possible. I'm going to just look at the 2 classes of combining functions. In the book, I have 8 of them, but for this talk, we'll just look at 2 of them. One of them is addition. That's linear, of course. The purely linear version is you take the key plus the message byte. You can apply the nonlinear substitution to the key. You can apply it to the message byte. You can apply a nonlinear substitution to both the key and the message byte independently. You can apply a nonlinear substitution to the sum, and then you have all these other combinations: the sum and the key, the sum and the message, and the sum, the key, and the message. Each one of these takes just a table lookup. Your substitution is just an index look into a substitution table. And then you can do exactly the same thing with exclusive OR. So you can the vanilla kind is you take the key byte and you exclusive OR it with the message byte. But now you can non-linearize that by applying the substitution to the key, to the message byte, to the key byte and the message byte, to the exclusive OR, which is the modulo 2 sum, and so forth. Even this most complex of expressions is still only 3 table lookups. A downside of this, using these nonlinear substitutions, is you have to mix the alphabets. I mean, mix the substitution alphabets, and that gives you a setup time when you're doing your encryption. The AES and DES were designed not to have a setup time, but in modern practice, very large keys are used. So, especially in the military. So, instead of taking a separate step to mix an alphabet, you simply make that alphabet, those 256 bytes, you make that part of the key and you transmit that as part of the key. That eliminates the setup time, makes the transmission of the key a little slower, but absolutely worth it.